Welcome to the Impact of AI Explored podcast, hosted by James O'Regan and Jurjan Kunst. Created by and for IT professionals, we focus on how AI reshapes our daily work. With AI insights growing every day, we cut through the noise to deliver what matters most. Join us as we explore the latest breakthroughs, share best practices, and empower you to make the most of AI in your career.
Hi everyone, welcome to the latest Impact of AI Explored. Today we have a guest that is Ronni Strom. Ronni, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, so my name is Ronni. I'm a management consultant, and I have been for about 20 plus years, I think, by now. I specialize in digital transformations from the point of sometimes facilitating or even participating in the creation of strategies. And after that, the execution of it in various forms. And that has been a history of many, many different contexts and companies and businesses, sometimes triggered by mergers, sometimes triggered by turnarounds, sometimes triggered by disruptions happening in the tech world, and sometimes even new frameworks being introduced, for instance, when the agile wave happened. So my history is sort of very colorful. And at this point in time, I guess I'm sort of a Swiss Army knife of different capabilities that can be applied. And so the segue into the AI world is almost apparent because back in, I think, 2021, 22, when the whole ChatGPT thing got introduced to the world and became a very big hype, let's say, in its very early stages, there was a push to decision makers to put it on the agenda for various reasons. But from my experience, this was driven from the point of either business owners or board of directors who maybe mostly are of a generation where they for sure remember a lot of the previous big digital disruptions that have happened. And so even though there might not be, especially at that point in time, a keen understanding of what this technology actually is and what it means, I think a lot of those decision makers, very, very smart people, recognize that something is coming and it's likely going to have a massive impact on business. We don't know what it is yet, but we for sure need to put it on our radar, thus on the strategic agenda. And that's a tough one for, let's say, the upper echelon of decision makers within an organization to put that on the agenda and make it specific and concrete at that point in time. So I started getting some phone calls from the business network, simplifying it a little bit, but basically asking, how do we put this on the agenda? We started with the one bullet point, AI, and then what?
Let's start from there.
Yeah, exactly. And if we go back in time to the point of the early versions of ChatGPT, there was not any kind of application of generative LLM in any serious, let's say, business context at that point that you could sort of refer to. There was definitely not, I would argue, significant proof of value that you could point to and say that's the direction. What you could do is sort of revert back to some of the earlier disruptions that have happened, some of which were actually quite big if we think back far enough. So you could even go back to computing at some point. If you're old enough, you realize that's a massive thing, obviously. And after that, there was a point of internet becoming a thing. And then after internet becoming a technology, there was web pages becoming a thing. And then there was, at a later point, apps becoming a thing, and so on and so forth. And all of these waves have had humongous impacts. And I think a lot of the high-end decision makers, even in business school, have learned when they have touched upon the topic of digital and technology, they all know the stories of those businesses that disappeared basically, and those that took off completely because they understood how to adopt early and so on and so forth. So thus, that awareness was there, but how to approach it, tricky.
Mm.
And so that triggered a lot of these strategic business talks at that point in time, with a lot of questions that were very, very difficult to answer. From my point of view and my experience, of course, some of these reached out to the big consultancy houses who always have some kind of answer. But at that point in time, at least, the answers seemed to be a little bit disappointing. Either the answers were sort of vague, sort of a rehash, a reuse of strategic frameworks that has already been used in many other areas that didn't seem relevant, or some of them even attempted to bring on their own little handbag of gadgets. Try these tools that we have made in our early adoption of AI. And that didn't really help too much at that point in time. There wasn't even a sort of a best practice palette of tools that you could point to. I mean, Copilot didn't exist at that point, for instance. So to bring a bit of history into it, I had one of these actually close friends of mine who were also at a C-level at a company here in Denmark. I had a cup of coffee with him, and then I proposed that maybe this is to be approached as a design challenge more than anything, because that has worked in previous iterations of these disruptions. For instance, if we think back to the introduction of internet and web pages, everybody and their grandmother needed a web page. That was a sudden realization, and then those of us old enough remember a cascade of web pages that were filled with GIFs and colors and oversaturated with stuff that was absolutely useless.
Using front page.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh God, front page. Oh my God. Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
I got out of front page as soon as I could and got onto Dreamweaver because the front page was like a disaster of an application. Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Some of these things gave like an immediate migraine if you looked at it.
Oh yeah, front page definitely. I nearly threw a monitor across this room trying to use front page one time. I was just like, this is woeful.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody listening is too young to know what we are talking about, I dare you. Look it up on the internet.
See what we had to deal with when we were younger.
Exactly.
Yeah. Have painkillers ready.
And glasses. Strong sunglasses.
It's interesting though to think about that context, because all business decision makers at that point in time all realized all at once that we need to have a representation on the internet in some form, and that was, I think, for the majority, sort of the extent of thinking is that we need to be represented there so that we are present. Or what happens there is that you follow the flock, right? You do what exactly 90% of the population does. But then at one point or some point, design thinking were applied to that digital disruption. A couple of examples could be, for instance, the Google page, right? So that was an example of all of this saturation turned into something super, super, super minimalistic and super, super useful. Very, very good design thinking. And Google ended up eliminating pretty much every other search platform, of which there were many back in the day. Another example, actually today I stumbled by coincidence over a very old video with Jeff Bezos, where he's sitting in front of his very first warehouse out on the lawn and talking excitedly about, so we got our first presence on the internet. It's going to be very, very exciting, and so on and so forth. And Amazon, of course, they created the design concept of one-click purchase or something like that, that you only have to fill out things once and then you have a button and you can buy. So that was a design thinking as well. Those are two examples of 80-90% of people move in the same direction when some disruption happens, and then they can check mark that we are with the wave. but the actual differentiation is a different kind of design thinking in many cases. There are apps examples of it also with Uber, for instance. Even with clouding, there was Dropbox is an example of the magic folder and so on and so forth. So anyway, back to the coffee talk I had with my my dear friend. So I was suggesting at that point in time that maybe the approach is that we do some design thinking, let's say workshopping with your company. He's a chief marketing officer in this company, so of course that could be an outset. But he gave a super interesting challenge back, which was, what if instead of starting at that point, what if I had a AI machine that could interview me, and I was answering its questions, and then I could sit there by myself, and then we have a different outset. And again, remember, this was back in the early ChatGPT days, so
2020,
2021, I think, something like that.
Okay. Mm.
And basically, my brain exploded and said, "I'll get back to you," because
let me research that for you.
let me think a moment. It didn't happen that we got to that point, but it sort of started a whole cascade of different thinking in these conversations, because I think it was such an interesting question at a point in time where everybody was querying, asking questions in a chat line, and they got text answers. They were prompting something out there constantly, but it was almost a one-way prompting and then an answer, one-way prompting, then an answer. So one of the next things I did myself was I took a course at MIT, specifically around the topic of the AI impact on business strategy or something like that. And that sort of validated a lot that, first of all, the real value is in the interfacing between human and machine. And it might sound banal, but it's still a big question today, I think, because my impression is, at least, that even though publicly the signaling might be a bit different, I highly suspect that many, let's say, decision makers in companies are thinking hard about how is AI a cost optimizing technology for the future? How can we very specifically save money by implementing XYZ technology?
Yeah, well, we've already seen it. If we look at a company like Klarna, they got rid of a bunch of people because they thought it was a cost optimization. It then turned out their end users actually hated talking to an AI, and they had to rehire a bunch of people. So cost optimization is a bit of a kind of, yes, that is one of the factors that are one of the advantages of AI, but there can be downsides to implementing that cost optimization.
Yeah, exactly. So that was one of the very specific things that we dived into in that study. Besides the fact that AI very quickly became a very, very broad term that covered a lot of technologies. So another problem that was addressed was that there has to be sort of a common framework or understanding of what we are talking about before you can talk with decision makers and apply anything to strategy. AI as a fluffy word doesn't apply to strategy. And then there was some referencing to some good old Michael Porter principles, one of which is, of course, that it is of super high importance to be a differentiator, and you don't do that by just following everybody else. And interestingly enough, I think that was around the same time as Microsoft Copilot was introduced. And if decision makers had a bit of a challenge of, let's say, how to specifically checkmark the AI challenge in the strategy, then Microsoft Copilot and that whole concept became the answer sent from the gods to that specific problem. And I'm not saying that in a positive manner necessarily. I don't think that's a good thing. But whatever we might think of it, Microsoft is obviously very, very, very good at their marketing strategies.
They got that one played, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. But from my point of view, it made these kinds of consideration and talks around AI strategy and the application of it a lot diluted, because the gist of it, the real source of it, sort of got taken out of the context, right? We have a check mark already in our brain. So it's just, how do we apply Copilot here? And we're good, right?
Oh, we've talked about this so many times. Like if that's where your starting point is, you're already going to fail. Like it's just, yeah. Like one of the big things we've talked about is your data and the importance of either classification, security, all of those kind of, let's not, boring stuff. Like everyone wants to do the flashy AI stuff, but my God, if you don't do the boring stuff, you're going to have an absolute disaster. And
the data quality.
Yeah, data quality, exactly. Yeah, because you don't know how many iterations you have of a particular document, and if you just like say, "Oh, we'll just enable Copilot across our SharePoint," that's not going to work. So yeah, I get it. Like people are like, "Oh, we've got the shiny thing. Let's go where the shiny thing is." But no, there's all the stuff, the stuff you have to do over here first.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would.
Sorry.
So, yeah, what you were saying is one of the things you mentioned is that IBM stated 70% of AI investments fall short. Is that something because of this, that they say, okay, we'll implement Copilot and then let's see, we're done? Or is it short-sightedness in the strategy bit that they're saying, okay, we don't know where to start, so let's start here and see what happens?
My best guess is that it's a mix of those two things. It's a bit of guesswork, of course, because I don't have the statistical data that IBM has. But my impression is for sure that, well, it's actually kind of two things. There's sort of a tech side of it, which is, you could argue that the tool set that's currently available, including Microsoft Copilot, just to be a bit provocative, has its absolute limits when it comes to the magic that it can do. So that means that the projects that were initiated are not providing that much magic. That's why we see a whole plethora of chatbots everywhere, because that's the current limit of the imagination, also design-wise currently. And the other, maybe even more interesting problem, at least in my personal experience so far, is that since the hype curve have gone up and probably peaked by now and is on its way down, at the peak of the hype curve, it was super interesting to talk about AI, to have workshops about AI, to analyze, and so on and so forth. But as soon as it got to a point where now we have to do some kind of practical implementation or actual development of something, there was almost a hard stop, and then a review, a reiteration of the whole analysis thing, which could even be catalyzed further by the fact that you could excuse it, so to speak, by this technology moving so fast that within the 3 months that we have discussed so far, something new has happened, right? And so you can keep going in circles and not really getting anything tangible created. And thus the AI investment from the point of view of decision makers is sort of, diluted over time, right? It doesn't produce anything of significant value. If the most tangible thing materializing is a chatbot, or it's the use of Microsoft Copilot's transcription features or something like that, if that's the maximum, it's very, very difficult to prove the value of the business case that the investment was, right? Or at least it's going to be a disappointment. And that's not even taking into account the adoption part of it and all of that. So as the hype curve is going down, I think that the current challenge that decision makers have is that they're sort of, it's no longer that hype to discuss. Maybe it's even more interesting to discuss all the pitfalls of AI that can even be catalyzed by the oversaturated social media uh, of all the Yeti videos we're getting currently, and next month it's going to be something else. And I can sort of catalyze the it's a gadget. A lot of it is fake, and so on and so forth.
Do you think there's a lot of pressure on decision makers, like because you have this avalanche essentially of you have to be doing AI, like you're getting left behind if you don't, and do you think they're feeling that pressure?
Absolutely, but I think they felt that pressure more than they do at the moment. In general, it's very general, all of this. But I think at the peak of the hype curve, for sure, FOMO, fear of missing out, or fear of being left behind, was extremely apparent, and it was very, very, very powerful. At this point in time, that might have diminished a little bit in general, meaning that, okay, so there's not been any of these super major disruptive companies yet, other than the AI LLMs themselves, but we haven't seen that super use of something very creative design-wise that just takes everything by storm. But it will for sure happen. But since it's not happened yet, the fear of missing out is diminishing and diminishing and diminishing over time. And also, it's easier. This is my own very personal take about it, but it's all, as the hype curve is going down, it also gets easier and maybe more interesting to talk about all the hindrances, the compliance problems, the data problems, the security problems, and all of those explanations for why we can't move forward. Even though, of course, they all have their relevance, but it's sort of becoming an over relevance at this point in time. It's if that's all the talk is about, then you are going to miss out at some point. So that's the interesting movement. Of course, it's also interesting to talk about, okay, so what's a possible solution to all of this? And that's where the design thinking, I think, comes in. For our part, what we have done the past year is, one thing is a lot of experimentation, because it looks like this is a new kind of technology that sort of demands that you experiment in even shorter iterations that software development have pushed for so far. So if we again go back in time a little bit, the reason that a thing like the Agile framework was introduced in the first place was because the old ways of thinking about projects and investments in big chunks and
waterfall and big
yeah,
projects,
exactly. Not that the waterfall approach is good in its context, but in software development, all of a sudden, shorter iterations of building something and then trying it with the ones that were going to use it were necessary, and that's a different way of governing and managing ways of working. Let's say the introduction of AI, this AI technology that we're seeing right now, especially when it approaches agents and so on and so forth, that calls for even shorter iterations, maybe even super short iterations, meaning that whatever we can think about or talk about today, we can basically create tomorrow or during the weekend and then try on Monday with some users in some form. It's no longer a month investment or a half a year investment. It's a very short iteration of, we built something. We don't even just draw it on a napkin. We build it, and then we try it, and then we redo it, and then we try it again. That's a thing that we've been working with quite a bit for the past year, trying all kinds of things, tapping into the whole agent thing, I think, quite a bit before it became like a public topic, because it was just a necessity if we were to try and, let's say, simulate a steering committee in a company, challenging a project manager, or coming up with pitches to salespeople or things like that. That almost in itself calls for different agents talking to each other, maybe having an overseer and all of that. And then we had some talks with of course companies at a later point in time that wanted to do something with AI strategy. Our suggestions, and it still is that again we should approach this as a design problem and think through it as a design problem, and maybe even put the AI topic on a shelf for a little bit, and then consider the concrete pain points that we have in our company or parts of the company, and identifying them, maybe even to the point of very practical little details. Let's say that a salesperson has when he drives around in his car, or he has to do some research on the next potential customer. He has to find leads or whatever it is. What are the specific pain points that he has? And then once you have them, flip them to opportunity spaces that we can do something with digitally. And then it might be that we can automate something, or we can create a digital space for that, or calls to action, or whatever it is. And it might be that we can apply AI to assist you in some of these areas. And we've had some fantastic sessions. One that's worth referencing, I think it's worth crediting them even, is a company called Ceramic Speed that makes ceramic bearings. It's a Danish-based company, but it's international. They are very, very, very innovative and do high-quality stuff for the cycling industry and the motorsport industry, and they really wanted to move fast. We had some really good conversations, even with the board of directors and the owner. And the owner is a "let's go, guys" type of guy. So we suggested, okay, so if we are to do it that quickly, we can try and do a compact version of this. So if we have representatives from, let's say, all relevant corners of the business, and the board of directors, and maybe even the owner if he has the time, and also, the engineers, the R&D people, the sales people. And then we try to map out what are the pain points across the supply chain in the company, or the value chain in the company, whatever is relevant. And then from that point, once we have the pain points, try and flip them into something that is AI. The result of that was that they eventually ended up with having, I think, 5 or 6 very concrete ideas for AI initiatives that could be applied in the company. Not fluffy stuff, not like that idea could potentially something. No, very, very concrete idea to address something that you could measure immediately. Yeah. I don't think I'm at liberty to give examples, but
yeah, we had on our last episode we had a guest, and he was implementing AI for a healthcare company, and he took the task everyone hated and implemented and utilized AI to make that process so much easier. So he got the adoption and the buy-in from the end users straight away. So the fear factor was gone. So I just thought it was a really good way of kind of getting the users on side by taking something everyone absolutely hated and just making it so much simpler.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also, I think, if the users have been invested in identifying the issue and coming up with the possible solutions without it being technical at all, that makes them invest in adoption as well quite quickly.
Makes them part of the solution.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I agree on that. That makes sense, because I think this is part of the reason why these AI initiatives fail, is because that you don't get buy-in from the end users. They've seen it before. They there's too much hype around these things. If you talk briefly about AI agents, my word, there is so much hype around AI agents. We did a whole episode and we broke it down and debunked what most of what we have at the moment. They're actually automations. They're not proper AI agents at all. Right.
Yeah. So I have to find that episode. That makes me curious.
Oh yeah. We'll send you the link. But
Thank you.
Anyone else, we'll put it in the comments as well. So yeah. But we were, because my LinkedIn feed was just AI agents, AI, and then I just went, okay, I need to look at this, because this is just not making any sense. And then when you dig deeper, it's like, no, actually what we have is we have some really, we have some clever automations, but we don't have AI agents, which you set them a task, they go off, do it, and come back, and they are free to make decisions within that. We do not have those at the moment. And in some ways, we probably don't want them either. So,
Nope, not necessarily. Exactly.
Exactly. This is autonomous agents. Nope.
Yeah, no.
It feels a bit scary to leave everything.
Yeah,
handled
exactly.
automatically.
Yeah, there's a book by Ethan Mollick called Co-Intelligence, and it has a use case of giving an AI a task, and it basically ends up in the destruction of the Earth. It was a really simple
Nothing
task.
less.
It was. I'll put the book in the comments as well. But the task was to create paper clips. But how the AI went about that is mind blowing. That it was so singularly focused that the destruction of the planet didn't bother it, and
Right.
No,
because
the
there'd
task
be
at
no
hand,
guardrails put in place to say, don't do this. This is what guardrails do. And that's part of your AI strategy. If you are looking at agents, is like, my God, make them the most strictest guardrails possible, and it's only this specific thing that you want them to do, because the consequences could be pretty dire. And then, I suppose the other thing around agents and is like, who's responsible for them? Like, the AI is not responsible for them. Whoever implemented them. So yeah, I just think AI agents is a whole kettle of fish that, if you don't nail your strategy at the start, it can just spiral so quickly.
Yeah. I totally agree. Yeah, I have a bit of things to share on that part. But before I do that, just one little thing before I forget that I think is very, very important and interesting is that from a design perspective, in all of these engagements we've had so far, we try to implement one thing, which is whatever we end up creating, the user should no longer prompt, because it feels like we're back in the DOS days, right? In terms of technology, and Windows has not been created yet, and we're not moving away from that. So whatever we do, we just keep prompting in text, and then we get text back. I know there is voice applications as well and all of that, but still, that's the level that we are at. In terms of designing an interaction with AI, we are in dire need of an alternative to that. What's the next step where you no longer talk? So a lot of our experimentation in terms of design has been, if we create this, but there's no prompt, what does it look like? And then all kinds of stuff happens. So it's just I encourage people to try to think of it, those that has to come up with some application that uses AI. Try to think of it in terms of that. I'm sure it's going to happen in cascades in the future, in the near future, because it's the natural next step. Right? It's super interesting to think about. In terms of agents, like I mentioned, we tried our version of it, and I'm not super surprised by what you're saying, because I think a lot of people think about this technology kind of like the traditional compute, right? So we put something to do something like a factory worker, it'll execute, and then lo and behold, we have saved some resources. But this technology is a completely different kind of compute, right? It's not a binary output at all. That's the first thing. So if you want a binary output, it's more like RPAs or whatever. It's that direction you need to think. This is very different. This is almost like having some iteration of personality to interface or collaborate with, and that's the context to think about it. That has its limitations. It also has its potential, and I think it's the same in terms of agents. So agents is just, what is it? It's basically framing LLMs for a specific use that can collaborate with each other. So you sort of need to set the boundaries. The way that we try to work with this so far is we came up with basically writing a codex for a specific agent. So this is this is what you are, this is your limitations, this is how you should think about XYZ. You are, to caricature it a little bit, you're this kind of sales assistant type person that specializes in this specific things. This is your limits, this is your rule set. And then it can sort of move within that space or framework. It's sort of like having a kind of an employee and then explaining this is what you should do and this is what you are. And just like an employee is not a robot, so you can't count 1-to-1 on things happening exactly as you imagine or as you think you're saying it. But stuff will happen because it's a potent technology. And then these frameworks can sort of interact with each other, but there's limits to that also. The more there are, the more gray areas that are also introduced. And you can try to sort of force them to do the specific thing that you want them to, but it's not going to be 100%. That I also think impacts users' trust in the technology. That's it. There's an adoption problem here as well, right? Because if you make something that should be usable and tangible for your business that is AI driven, there's a surprising challenge in gaining the user's trust. As soon as they see that the output is not correct, if they see that 2 or 3 times, they're like, "This, you can't trust this thing." Imagine you're the secretary of a lawyer and you have this cool new tool that can spit out a lot of information and be very helpful. But if it's like the 3rd time you catch an error, the trust goes out the window. I should do this myself. I have to read it every time to fact check.
Yeah. I even find that myself. Like I will always go and check whatever output I get from an LLM because, you have hallucinations, you have whatever, it could just be incorrect information, and it's not perfect in any way, but neither are we. So
Exactly.
so
That's the other thing, yeah.
is it really that bad? Because we're not. So why do we built these things? Why do we expect them to be perfect when its creators are not? So
and that's back to the understanding what this thing is, because I think most people, at least in the beginning, they think of it sort of like it's computer stuff. Thus, it's like a calculator. 1 + 1 is 2. Period. And this thing is just completely different from that. So there's a framework thing. Every time we do this design thinking around AI with companies, there's some frameworking to do before we even get started talking. There's some hypotheses that needs to be iterated or verbalized amongst everybody, so we have a common understanding and maybe a bit of explanation of to a certain degree of what this is and what this isn't in terms of technology.
The guardrails for the strategy meeting.
I'm sorry?
The guardrails for the strategy meeting.
Yeah, sort of, or at least a common understanding, right?
Yeah.
We even did it in the example I just mentioned with the ceramic speed, the bearings company. I think we had about 30 people in the workshop. Everybody just left the titles outside the door and then engaged in all of this. It was very, very good. But what we did before the actual workshop was send everybody the same little 5-10 minute video that sort of explained that you should think of generative AI as a sort of your Einstein in the basement. It's not a video that we can take credit for. It was somebody made this very, very good video that sort of explained it in a simple way, that this is how you should consider it. So it's not a calculator. It's sort of like a type person that you can talk to and that knows a lot of stuff. I saw that Andre Kaparfi recently compared it a little bit to Rain Man from the old Tom Cruise movie, and I think that was a brilliant comparison.
Yeah, that's a pretty good analogy of it. Yeah, because it does have a very specific way of thinking, but you can, and it's not it's not like how we think. And another thing we talked with another guest was about the temperature you set on the LLM and the impact that can have. Like the results go from, oh yeah, you can do this, and then you can do this crazy thing, and it's like, So yeah, that's actually pretty good. I like that one.
Yeah. And there's also, maybe it'll give people a good understanding just to realize that it is the personality. And I mean, it has a vague memory of knowledge of the entire internet. That's super, super impressive, but it's not applied to that is sort of a personality. That personality got there by training. It was people training it. So it's sort of a reflection of a lot of people's personality that is ingested into this thing. And that is the polite LLM that we are talking to is that training. So in a sense, it's a reflection of people, thus not a calculator.
Yeah.
Thus not 100% reliable.
That also, yes. Yeah. Yeah, so that's where we are at the moment. We are currently engaging in with a different company right now that deals with engineering problems, basically. Very, very highly competent technical company called Creadis in Denmark. Also an international company, but they are already at the point where, okay, so we're past the AI strategy talk. How can we apply some technology here that can do something real? And our process there is, let's get the hypothesis on the table. Let's get some insights, talk to the actual people to do the actual work, identify the actual pain points without diving into AI tech talk. Once we have that, we flip that to opportunities. So one of the next things that are going to happen is actually we basically interview one of the stakeholders that has something invested in this, which is the CEO. And then we listen to his pain points, not from a company strategic perspective, but his specific pain points, right? So we get those on the table, and then we'll do similar things with other people. And then our ambition is to start experimenting immediately after summer, basically, in short iterations.
Yeah, we had on our previous episode a guest, and he gave the use case, which was just mind blowing, to be honest. It was to do with the maintenance of wind turbines in the North Sea. And calculating when the waves were at their lowest level so they could send boats out to do repairs on the wind turbines. And the boats were costing like 200,000 euro a day. So they were trying to use AI. They were actually weren't they using swarms of drones? Yeah. And then sending all the data back. And I was just like, but this was a specific use case. But it was just, it was beyond what I had thought was possible, to be honest. And it's just such a cool use case. And I said, you can check out the whole thing on the previous episode. But yeah, it just, when you mention engineering firms, it's like there are so many potential applications within engineering that are, not the normal, create this document, whatever. They're solving actual real life use cases.
Right. That's a super interesting example, because it's a very real pain point that they have that potentially could be at least helped with this technology, probably some heavy duty machine learning and
big LLMs, etc. And the cool thing is, you talked about the interface. There is no interface.
Nope.
You just say go predict.
Yeah.
And then magic happens and things come back.
That's wild.
Really. Yeah, that's wild. Yeah. And I think if you look at the future, what you're saying about the chat, etc., I think this is the part where AI makes our life easier. Yeah. It automates all the tricky stuff away, and you can just do what you're paid to do. Yeah.
It sort of depends on case by case, right? Because there's it's actually a good example of let's imagine that we had this discussion within a company. We had to sort of come up with applications of AI, and then that's an example, and another one has an example of transcribing the latest meetings and whatnot. Two completely different, let's say, contexts and different technologies that could be in use there, and that's why it's a good idea from the outset to at least express the understanding, so you can sort of find a common ground, and once you have that, you can start talk about it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So just to kind of start to wrap things up a little bit, Ronnie, if you're like a CEO or a VP and they're listening to this and they kind of want to get their AI strategy or initiative back on track, what's the most important thing they need to do?
That is an excellent question. That sort of depends a little bit on where they are in terms of already having initiatives going. But I would say there's a little bit back to the Michael Porter of things, meaning that I think it's very, very valuable to consider exactly what is the measurable value that we would like out of this, and how can we make the shortest possible iteration to prove that that is possible. And it's not proven by let's say just having the idea, the excitement, that's all good. But the end user, that being a business unit or an actual customer, has to have hands-on or interface with the thing, the experiment, the prototype, whatever it is, very, very early in the process, and sort of validate that there is potential value here. And I think the critical point that is easy to miss is that mistrust of the quality of the output, especially when it's the generative technology that we are talking about. Because like we discussed, you for sure cannot trust that the output is always the same unless it's things like machine learning or actual robots. But if it's generative, it will be different, and it will possibly not always be factual. So the quality bar there has to be very, very high for it to be usable in many contexts. So you have to prove that. So the recommendation would be very specific about what this investment is for, what it's going to prove, and that is possible. And then make a short iteration, do that experiment. The technology is there to make rapid experimentation that is tangible, have the users or customers validate that there's something here before you take the next step. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, no, that sounds perfectly reasonable to me. So, yeah, Ronnie, thank you very much for being our guest. We really appreciate it, and we will see everyone on the next episode.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you very much.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ronnie.